You're listening to Cents Per Mile, and I'm your host, Paul Gibson. Charles Gracie won't be with us today. He is at FreightWaves F3 having the best time of his life. That being said, before we get started, wherever you're listening or watching, if you could like, subscribe, or rate, and tell all your friends, that would be amazing and a huge help to us so we can start doing even more cool stuff. Once again, kind of like last week when I was out with the flu, I am back with our producer, Josh Haynes.
Glad to be back. So what are we talking about today on Cents Per Mile? What's our episode about?
Politics.
Oh, God.
Well, okay, so not just like politics all the way around. You know, I know that's a hot button issue. A lot of people have a lot of feelings. Things have gotten way more divided. So not just in general, and we're not even necessarily talking about the midterms, but in the spirit of that, we thought it'd be cool to go through the process of the politics of trucking.
So who do we have on today's episode?
Today, our guests are Josh Mecca, who is the recruiting director for American Central Transport, who we've had on the show before, but has an extensive background in politics. We also have Desiree Wood, who is the president of Real Women in Trucking, as well as the director of government affairs for OOIDA, Collin Long.
That's exciting. I'm excited to hear from all these people. So who's first up out of these great guests?
We have Josh Mecca. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, how's it going? So, politics in America have come a long way, and we're at a weird spot, and the midterms are next week. So we thought we'd kind of talk about politics from, a trucking standpoint. What does the political process look like from the standpoint of the trucking industry?
That's a great question. There are so many different layers to this particular question. You've got your local government, you've got state, you've got federal, you've got the election issues, you've got the stuff tied up in the agencies. So it really kind of just depends on which one of those is the most important to you. We being in the trucking sphere, we're federally regulated, so we really kind of have to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in Washington. And I think you nailed it with we are at a very interesting crossroads right now politically in this country. I would say the first and foremost thing that anybody can do is vote. It's one of the things that we as citizens of this country have the right to do, and we need to take advantage of that. When I say vote, I mean don't just go and pick the first name on the box, which unfortunately statistically is who wins. But with that, be an informed voter, and you become an informed voter by reading multiple sources. Don't become a one-channel voter. Don't just pay attention to what your favorite news agency is saying, left, right, center, extreme. You've got to read it all. You've got to kind of understand. And I know, unfortunately, due to some of our dwell time situations, we have time to research. But with that being said, be informed. Know what the topics are. Know what's going on in the polls. And I will say one of the most interesting things that I have found here in the last couple of years is this time of COVID. It has made being an absentee voter that much easier because no longer do we really have to be at the polling station on voting day. We can vote early. We don't have to have, the same process to get out of voting on voting day that we used to because we've made it easier. We've tightened up some laws around who can vote, how can vote, voter IDs. I mean, we should all have our IDs, right? Our CDLs work for that. Have your IDs ready to go, know your precincts, know your issues, and just go vote. A lot of your county offices, your counties should have a county election office. Find where that is. Reach out to them. See if you can get in there early. See if you can get in there and vote on home time. There's almost every place I've seen, every jurisdiction these days has sample ballots that you can find online. So we've got a couple hot buttons ones this term in Missouri. And so I wanted to make sure that before I went and voted that I knew what my vote meant because that language is tricky language. That language is written by attorneys for attorneys. It's not written toward people like us who don't have a legal background to understand because there's a lot of words in there that I don't understand. But what I do know is when I go look at that sample ballot and I go and I look at multiple sources, I can make a more informed decision and do my duty as a citizen.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, it's a little bit easier said than done, as a driver, especially if you're over the road. But, I mean, you make a great point with the fact that regardless of how you feel about it, early voting and absentee ballots have become even more easier to access to get your vote in. That being said, kind of a little bit more into the weeds with this. What, in your opinion, is the best way? Because obviously, unfortunately, like trucking isn't quite as big of a talking point as, a lot of people, especially who are close to it, feel like it should be. So let's say that I'm a driver advocating for myself or, like myself, advocating for drivers. What would you say is the best way to figure out a politician's stance who's up for election on the trucking industry? If they haven't done any interviews about it, if they haven't done anything out there, what is the best way to find out how that politician feels about the transportation industry before you vote for them?
Yeah, you see, that's where I think the hard part is. That's where it gets a little bit tricky, because I think we know with our political system, we all get the promises that we hear our politicians and the officials say, but what you've really got to do is just make sure that pay attention to your trade groups. I'd say the most important thing to all of us is the industry we're in, regardless if it's transportation or medical or take your pick here, right? But when it comes to the trucking specifically, take a look at what your organizations say about those candidates. They have got people that are in place that understand those candidates, understand kind of what's happening behind the scenes. Because I guarantee you, what we see on the news is only a surface of what's happening, behind those Capitol doors, state, federal, local. I mean, Paul, we even saw it happen last year in Clay County, Missouri, where the whole commissioner board got turned upside down. But you just really got to pay attention to those groups. And what I also tell everybody to do is don't look at just one. Don't look at just what the American Trucking Association says. Don't look at just what the truckload carriers say. Take a look at what OOIDA is saying about the candidates. Take a look at what NASTAC, the National Association of Small Trucking Companies. Take a look at what each one of these groups is saying. And in that way, you get that good cross-section of what that candidate really, truly represents. Because, again, if you follow just one of those channels, you might miss, the forest for the tree. You're not gonna be able to get the whole picture of what that candidate's doing or what they've done in their past. Pay attention to what their career was. What was their job before they got into politics? How did they get here? There's so much that you can tell about that person, even if they don't have necessary talking points about what that position is. If a person who's always been in insurance, chances are they might be difficult from our industry. I mean, it's just kind of, they're going to play it safe. It's just the nature of insurance, right? But if you get somebody that's been in the public workforce, public sector, coming out of, law enforcement or construction or, some sort of a business-minded background, chances are they might be a little bit more open with what we can do from a trucking industry perspective. So just pay attention to that whole person. Really the multiple channels is really critical to understanding and evaluating any candidate.
So as a driver, for our audience, is there anything particularly that you could think of that a driver could do to become active in the process beyond just voting?
Yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind immediately. Just recently, the ATRI list of hot topics in the industry was released. That's a completely free resource, and I guarantee you the entire Department of Transportation has that survey on their desk right now. I know our current administration just sent Secretary Buttigieg and his crew out to the most recent TCA conference. Might have been ATA conference. I'm probably getting those two mixed up. Forgive me. Out in San Diego. They spent a whole week with the industry or with industry leaders to address what's coming out of these surveys. That's something you go, it's the Paul, you probably have to double check my initials on it, but it's the ATRI. I think think it's the American Trucking Research
Institute. Yep.
Yeah. So they've got their topics out there, and for the first time in several years, there's a new number one topic, and that's the cost of fuel. It's been truck parking, it's been driver, it's been hours of service, industry, insurance reform, all of these different things. But this year, fuel became number one as the most concerning thing in the industry. They take that survey done from two different perspectives. It's done from drivers, it's done from office, so that way we can understand and gauge what we're actually seeing on the front lines. You've got that topic. You've got your industry groups that you can join and you can be a part of. I know a lot of them offer either discounted or free membership if you're an active over-the-road truck driver. There's different ways like that you can get involved. A lot of our state organizations have road captain teams. I know I was just meeting with Mark Olson from the Alabama Trucking Association. They've got a fantastic road trucking team. The American Trucking Association's road captains are well represented by the Walmart drivers, YRC drivers. And I think there's an opportunity for us in the over the road segment to step up and say, hey, there's more to it than just being in our terminals every day or every 2 days or whatever that rhythm is. So we've got to, as an industry too, we've got to step our voice up so that way they can understand that there's more to trucking than just the LTL guys or just the private trucking companies. But really, I'd say the key thing is just start by researching your local candidate. Find out who's in office, learn about your candidate, reach out to their office. They're going to have different teams that are set up right there for you. And all you got to do is reach out. A lot of times that hardest step is the first one, right? But we want to get out there and get involved. And, with this election coming up, it may be too late to do an absentee or remote ballot. But get situated. If you're not registered, get registered. Learn your voting office and get it for the next time, because there's so many important issues that get addressed in these midterm elections that aren't the big general elections that we all think of. But we have to get involved. I think our primaries for this election has like a 15% turnout rate. 15% of the eligible voters in this country determine who's going to be representing us in these general elections this fall. Just think about that number for a second. 15%. 85% of us out there did not do our part to make sure that we have better candidates to not complain as much about.
All right, well, cool. That was a lot of good information, man. I super appreciate that. So glad to have you back on, and thanks for stopping by.
Pleasure as always. Thanks, Paul.
All right, Paul, so who do we have next on this episode?
All right, our next guest is Desiree Wood. She is an actual truck driver and also runs the organization Real Women in Trucking. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Oh, making it. Things are pretty crazy. But yeah, so we wanted to bring you on the show because, we're talking about, truck drivers finding a way to have a voice, not only in the political process, but within like regulations and whatnot inside the industry. So can you kind of tell me about Real Women in Trucking and like how that came to be?
Yeah. I became a truck driver myself in 2007, and I just found that the training was, grossly unsafe, not just from the regulation point of view, pushing students through the system so fast and having them doing team driving when they barely knew how to make a lane change, but also personally unsafe by making you live and work in a training environment with trainer-student and then student-student, which was basically the blind leading the blind. But you also didn't really know where this other person came from and what their agenda was. So as I started to learn about some of the violence that was happening, not gender specific, some of it sexual violence, and found that it was pretty well known, but nobody wanted to do anything about it. I joined a newly formed Women's Trucking Association, and they actually sent people to stalk me online and eventually revoked my membership. I kept talking about the subject matter throughout 2009 and ended up on an interview with Dan Rather. Today, a lot of people don't even know who Dan Rather is. That's how long ago it was. And I just found that as I looked at all of the organizations and associations and all of this trucking association organization, none of them really actually represented the drivers. There was no driver advocates really. And I joined, the other women's one, but I joined another one for owner operators. And I just found, overall, truck drivers really have no one speaking for them about what is happening on a day to day. And they're just disorganized by design, it appeared to me. So, we started Real Women in Trucking because we are really drivers. We are not executives or women that were installed to speak for companies. We wanted to talk about real things like sexual violence and training and unsafe training. We got involved very much in Jason's Law movement when Jason Rivenberg was murdered, and have continued to be part of that when many other organizations and associations were not even attending the meetings. So that kind of got the ball rolling. And then now in 2019, we formed a second organization called Truckers Emergency Assistance Responders. The acronym is TEAR. And what we do there is we help drivers that have been stranded due to carrier abandonment, something that should not happen in any industry, but it does in trucking, where you can basically leave your employee on the other side of the country with no resources to get home whatsoever. And so that organization helps drivers get home with their pets and belongings.
Mm-hmm. Yep, you can. They mandate a lot of things, but they don't mandate what you have to do to help a driver who's not in a position to make you money. It's pretty sad. So that's awesome. And that's a huge accomplishment because the first step is the hardest, but I mean that process to even get those sorts of things going and getting momentum is a massive lift, and that's amazing. So for our audience, what would you say, not necessarily to start their own organization, but what are some ways that as a driver you can make your voice heard in the process?
Well, the first thing drivers need to understand is they are often voting the same way as the major lobby groups for the companies, which makes no sense. So they have a pretty good grip on what is wrong with trucking, but then they go and vote right along with these big lobby groups that are not worker focused. So be informed. Go and read on websites like Open Secrets and make sure you are separating fact from fiction, and understand that there are entities that like us fighting with one another so that we can't pay attention to the real problem and solve it. So researching and educating yourself is really the first part of it, following the money and finding out what issues are the most important. There's so many trucking issues. So in Real Women in Trucking, I started getting asked, will you help us with this one? Will you help us with that one? Will you help us with this one? Well, we're just drivers who have started an organization that happen to build a very big social media presence all by ourselves. And a lot of people were coming to us to help them with their issue, but then they didn't want to help support our organization. So at some point we had to limit what we could speak on, because then we're spread out all over and we're not doing a good job on anything. So I think it's important for drivers to find an issue that they're very passionate about and then put some support behind it. Since we started Real Women in Trucking, there have been 3 or 4 other women's trucking groups that have formed that are for women of color. We have supported, and there's also the LGBTQIA truck drivers. we've tried to support all other smaller organizations in some way or another because we believe everybody deserves a seat at the table, and we certainly cannot speak for somebody that's living a different experience than us. Mm-hmm. But we always like to share the time with them to hear from everyone. I think it's important to have a lot of voices. Hopefully you can work with other groups without throwing them under the bus. That's important. We have seen that some come and go, but there's some general issues that we can all agree on. I think, the truck parking thing is one. We're starting to have some attention on some of the lease truck schemes that cheat drivers and basically make them misclassified workers, and the independent contractor model that really needs to be more well-defined in trucking, because there's people that it works real well for, but there's a lot of people that are just completely abused in it. Mm-hmm. And so, whatever group resonates with you, support them. Understand it's super hard to be an advocate and a truck driver and have a family and all of the things that come with, all the family stuff that's going on, in addition to trying to attend meetings and be present. We put out links for meetings. We always ask drivers, a lot more meetings are virtual now that helps you attend. Like, have a clear and concise question or statement or idea to put forth to get people thinking about it, because probably for the first time since I've been a truck driver, we have people that are listening to us and are interested in helping solve problems, but they have been listening to organizations that represent carriers or only want to dip their toe into the lukewarm water. They don't want to get all the way in neck deep. And so there's a lot of confusion about what is really happening to you out here.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That is awesome. And thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Good to talk to y'all.
All right, Paul, who is our final guest on today's episode?
Our last guest is Collin Long, Director of Government Affairs for OOIDA. Hey, Collin, how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being on.
So today we're kind of talking about what drivers can do even beyond voting to actually get involved into the political process of the industry. So I guess my first question to you is, what is OOIDA's goal as an association?
Our goal is to promote the needs of the concerns of the challenges, the opportunities of small business truckers and professional drivers here in Washington, D.C., but also throughout the country and state capitals. Our focus is primarily here in Washington because Washington has so much jurisdiction over our industry. But what we're trying to do is make sure that careers in trucking are sustainable, are viable, are successful, are safe, and that folks who enter the industry and want to become their own small business owner have a great opportunity to do so and a great chance to do so successfully. And frankly, it's not as easy as it sounds. I mean, it's easy to get your DOT number. It's sometimes easy to get your vehicle, but to make sure that you're operating a successful small business in trucking can be extremely difficult. And one of the biggest challenges is certainly federal laws and federal regulations, because oftentimes they don't make sense, and they make it much more difficult, much more costly, much more burdensome for truckers to operate their own small business, or even to just make a career out of driving as a professional for another carrier. So our mission is to make sure that the small business trucker has opportunity in the country and is able to make a productive and successful and safe career in trucking.
All right. So with that, how does OOIDA actually go about representing drivers inside Washington?
So we have boots on the ground here in D.C. We have for a number of years, but in the grand scheme of things, we're a pretty young association as far as lobbying is concerned. We've only been really in existence for the last 20 years, but we've been building up a team. We've been strengthening up a team here in Washington to represent truckers because we understand it's difficult for truckers to engage in the political process often because they are working so hard. They are across the country. They're not necessarily able to step foot into state capitals and the U.S. Capitol with any sort of regularity. So we take our job as kind of being the boots on the ground for the whole community of truckers very seriously, and we have a team in place here, and certainly our staff at headquarters who work together to promote the interests of drivers, both legislatively and regulatorily. So we work within the U.S. Capitol on laws and proposals that members of Congress and senators are considering and proposing. We try to make sure that the bad ones don't see much light, don't get much support, and the good ones work their way through what is oftentimes a very slow and deliberate legislative process. But then we also work within the Department of Transportation and other departments and agencies on regulations involving truckers. And that's often where we're playing defense, to be quite honest, because the U.S. DOT is seemingly always proposing new rules and regulations that don't necessarily improve conditions or improve safety on our highway, but cost our members a lot of money and a lot of headaches. So we're playing offense and defense in both the U.S. Capitol and the Department of Transportation. And like I said, we do our part here in Washington so that truckers can focus on what gets them paid and what keeps them safe on the road. But there is a give and take. We often rely on our members through grassroots advocacy to pick up the phone, to get on email, and to let their elected officials in Washington, in state capitals, in counties, and cities, let them know what the needs of truckers are. Let them know what types of proposals would benefit truckers and help make their careers more sustainable and safe, but also what is harmful. And a lot of times that's absolutely critical because elected officials don't necessarily have a business background. They certainly don't have a trucking background. I think I can count the number of lawmakers here in Washington who have experience in the trucking industry on one hand. So I think one of the key things that we try to instill in our members and any trucker who's looking to advocate on behalf of the industry is that don't forget you're the expert. You know this industry better than the elected officials you're talking to, often better than the folks who determine a lot of regulations across the country. So share with them your honest assessment of what is going on. Share with them the challenges you encounter every day and what can be done to make your career more successful and improve your safety when you are operating, because they need to hear it from drivers as much as they hear it from lobbyists here in Washington.
So you've used the example of, obviously voting if you can, if you can get in to vote, or if you have the ability to get an absentee ballot, those things aren't always the easiest when, you're an over the road truck driver. And you kind of lightly mentioned, writing your Congress people and talking to them and your representatives, on the state level, on the federal level, because they don't know. They only know what they know, and if someone doesn't tell them what's actually going on, they have no idea. Outside of those couple options, do you have any ways or any other actionable items that drivers could do to personally affect legislation or start to make a change on regulations?
Yeah, I've got a couple things, and the first one is probably the most challenging, but often the most fruitful, and that is when you are home and your congressperson or senator or even a local elected official happens to be home as well, schedule a meeting with them. I know a lot of folks believe, well, they're too busy. They represent too many people. They're always back and forth between Washington and our home to have any time to talk to me. That's not the truth. I mean, I worked in a congressional office for almost a decade, and we were routinely meeting with constituents who asked to come in and talk to my boss about specific issues. It happens, and they will love to talk to you, frankly. I mean, they want a better perspective on how laws and regulations and legislation are affecting their constituents. So don't be afraid to schedule time to sit down and chat with your member of Congress, your senator, or even their staffer. A lot of times there are staffers committed to transportation work, trucking work, that have a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more understanding of what's going on because they are tasked with following these issues much more closely than the member of Congress will. don't be afraid to sit down and chat with them, because again, you're the expert. You're going to be educating them and teaching them about what is needed, what is not needed in some cases, like overregulation. But don't be hesitant. And then I would also mention, when OOIDA tells our members and other drivers to weigh in on regulations that are working their way through the rulemaking process at places like the Department of Transportation, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the Environmental Protection Agency. When we ask you to weigh in, we're doing that because we know how valuable your feedback is to the development and potentially the defeat of these regulations. Oftentimes we're playing defense, but if we don't get our members to weigh in on these issues, it makes it much easier for agencies to move forward with regulations that don't necessarily make sense and will actually harm our members. So at no point can a trucker kind of sit back and trust the fact that OOIDA is going to take care of things in Washington. I know that doesn't sound like I'm doing my job to the best of my ability. I assure you I am. But there's kind of this two-pronged approach. You need the lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. doing kind of the nitty-gritty. But you also, as a driver, need to have some sort of responsibility to get involved as well, because there's strength in numbers. We say this all the time. The more drivers are active on these issues, the easier it is for us to fight the bad policies and push forward the good policies. So you have to be engaged. If you're not comfortable talking to your elected official or a staffer, you certainly need to become comfortable providing feedback to public comment periods on things like speed limiters, unique electronic identifiers, underride guards. These are all issues that could quickly become mandates and regulations that are affecting your operations and your business. So it's key that you weigh in and let the agencies and departments know how those policies are going to affect you.
So in addition to that, because I know comment sections, when legislation comes up, that's a huge deal. And I'm always surprised by how many people don't know that that's a thing. Can you kind of talk to me about how a driver could find those questions when they're open and find where to submit and those things? And then also, can you tell me about fightingfortruckers.com?
Yeah, actually, I think you just answered your own question with fightingfortruckers.com. We post on there frequently about rulemaking that are currently being undertaken at all different departments and agencies within the federal government that have an effect on trucking. So that's kind of your one-stop shop to find out what is going on. There are also going to be opportunities on there for you to click a couple buttons, enter your name, and send a message to the agency or to Capitol Hill, letting them know how you feel about something. The process could not be simpler, and we've gone to great lengths to make it even easier for truckers specifically to use the system and have their voice heard. You can do it from your cell phone. Don't do it while you're driving, but when you stop to take a break or refuel, pick up your phone and spend about 30 seconds to send a comment to the federal agency, which bolsters our efforts here in Washington. Gives us the air support we need to defeat a lot of these issues and promote a lot of the good ones that are actually working their way through the system. So Fighting for Truckers, I can't emphasize it enough. If there's something pertinent to the industry on there where we need drivers to be weighing in, you're going to find it there. And it's kind of disheartening to think that a lot of truckers aren't aware of these rulemakings going through the process at the Department of Transportation, because the folks who want things like speed limiters and unique electronic identifiers are fully aware of what's going on, and they are they're encouraging their members to weigh in on the issue. So we need to strike a balance. In fact, it wouldn't be balanced if every driver was active on these issues. The public comment period would be flooded with driver opinions on the issues, which is kind of an ideal situation. But right now, we just want to make sure that more and more drivers are getting engaged in both the legislative and regulatory process here in Washington, D.C., because it pays dividends in the end. I mean, right now, we're looking at a speed limiter mandate coming out of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, which we know drivers hate. We know it's not good for safety. Thankfully, during the last public comment period, there were 16,000 comments posted to FMCSA, most of them from drivers who opposed the proposal. That gives us a lot of fuel to fight this proposal both at the Department of Transportation, but also on Capitol Hill. We can go to Capitol Hill and say, hey, your constituents who are drivers really don't like this. Maybe you should use the authority you have to pump the brakes over at FMCSA or to eliminate this rulemaking entirely. So there are always benefits, even secondary benefits or unanticipated benefits to weighing in on a lot of these issues.
All right. Well, that's an awesome amount of information. Thank you very much, man, for coming on the show.
I'm glad to be here. I'd love to come back in the future and chat about some of these issues in a little bit more detail. But again, I mean, if you're able to vote, please do so. If you're unable, you can still be an active part of the legislative and regulatory process, and we need all the help we can get.
That was a lot of information, a lot of good information. And we weren't necessarily trying to get political, but, with the midterms coming up and we talk about a lot of things that have to do with overregulation on the show, we thought we would give you as a driver a pathway to something that you could actively do to possibly improve your experience on the road, to actually have your voice be heard. So that being said, I'd love to know if you liked this kind of content or if you hated it, or if you have another idea to be proactive politically. I'd love to hear it in the comments. I think that's pretty much it for this week's episode. Like, subscribe, rate, etc. And we'll see you next time.